FOMO, fear of missing out. Anxiety that an exciting or interesting event may currently be happening elsewhere.
It was early morning on a Utah highway, September 22, 2006. Young man driving down the road, Reggie was his name. A witness would later say, a witness who was driving behind Reggie, that his car at times wandered out of his lane. Reggie seemed to be unaware of that, continued driving at a relatively high speed, when at one moment in time he wandered into oncoming traffic, just enough that he sideswiped a car coming the other direction. The sideswipe was enough that it caused the other car to spin out. When it spun out into the lane behind Reggie's vehicle. Not far behind him came a rather sizable truck that T-boned the vehicle and snuffed out the lives of the two rocket scientists who were driving there. It was tragic. Horrible accident. As you can imagine, such kinds of things make the news. The devastation was real and the family members of those who had died. And then there was Reggie. What about Reggie? How had he been inattentive? He didn't really notice that he had wandered out of his lane. In fact, it was only because of the vehicle behind him, the one that T-boned the spinning car. And what he had observed in the miles before, that authorities were able to piece together what actually happened. Reggie was fine physically, but over a period of weeks and months, as the authorities began to dig into his case, and as Reggie began to sort through the realities of what had happened, a truth emerged. Truth was rather simple. Some had suspected, Reggie had denied. The truth was this: Reggie was texting and driving. He would later say, it was no big deal. I didn't even really think of that to begin with, because to me, to drive was to be on my phone. Talking, texting, driving, it all went together all the time. So at first, he denied that reality, but the authorities, going through phone records, talking to his girlfriend with whom he had been texting, finally put the truth together, and Reggie owned up. He also would say, I have no idea what I texted. It was just texting back and forth, no big thing about the day. Nothing that important. 2 lives gone. Scary, isn't it? Scary because I know something about such things in my own life and driving. In fact, it wasn't until I encountered Matt Richtel's book entitled A Deadly Wandering that tells the story of Reggie and goes into the science of attention that it hit me like a cold slap in the face. I can tell you, since going through that book, my habits have changed. You may want to be aware of some things. Possibly you already are, but they're worth knowing. Did you know, for example, that there are 100,000, according to the National Safety Council, 100,000 accidents every year on American highways due simply to texting and driving? Did you know that 98% of commuters, when asked, say texting and driving is dangerous, but that over 50% say, I do it? The question becomes, why? Is it just convenience? Is it just habit? Is it something else? Well, there are some who say that the culprit, the reason which drives it, is this thing called FOMO. FOMO. You know what it is, but I actually want to read you a brief summary, an executive summary from JWT Intelligence that describes a bit about FOMO. Do you have an uneasy and sometimes all-consuming fear that others are doing something or experiencing something that you're not? If so, you may be suffering from a new form of social anxiety called FOMO, or fear of missing out. The term, first identified by marketers in the mid-90s, refers to the sometimes energizing, sometimes terrifying anxiety that you're missing out on something absolutely terrific. It could be a party, a new movie, a special relationship, or a delicious romantic dinner. FOMO is an age-old problem that has accelerated thanks to real-time digital updates and the smartphone. Social media expert Mark A. Smith explained it this way. Those who used to dine behind thick stone walls and have caviar now do so, tweet about it, and can be seen by those sitting down to dinner at Chipotle. So you're eating your Chipotle meal, and you go on your phone, and there they are in a mansion dining on caviar. Welcome to FOMO. I'm missing out. Have you had that experience? In fact, it has led to something else, a bit more recent in coming onto the social scene, called nomophobia. Nomophobia was coined by the UK Post Office. UK Post Office said nomophobia is the fear of being without your cell phone. No mobile phone. Nomophobia. Have you ever experienced nomophobia? It's that feeling that something is just not right. I'm missing something. There's a part of me, an appendage that should be attached to me that somehow isn't. What happened? Where did it go? I can't live life until I find it. Nomophobia. Growing out of that, I want to share with you some stats, some interesting stats that studies have revealed. Just consider this. People check their cell phones an average of 34 times per day. 66% of people fear losing or being without their cell phones. 2/3 of us. 75% of people use their cell phones in the bathroom. I'm not borrowing your phone ever again, I'll tell you that right now. About 30% of people would rather leave the house without credit card or cash than without their mobile phones. 55% of women would rather leave home without makeup. Listen to this one. 11% of respondents would rather leave home without pants than without their smartphones. No pants. Would you all just stand for a minute? I just want to get a little bit of a feel here today. Something is crazy about that. I'll go out with no pants, but I got my phone. Can take a picture. 63% said they would climb through trash to find their cell phone. 25% say they would physically fight a thief to get their phone back. 40% said they would start to miss their phone in less than an hour. How long would it take you to miss your phone? 30% of those surveyed said their mobile device has come between them and their spouse. Now, I have to tell you, the pants one surprised me a bit, but that last one actually surprised me more, that only 30% said it comes between them and their spouse. I would have believed that to be much higher. FOMO, nomophobia, I got to be connected. Maybe it's time to ask ourselves some questions. So let me just encourage you to ask some questions, some of the kinds of questions I've been asking myself. I have not been particularly happy with my personal responses. But ask yourself some questions. How many times do I check my phone a day? 5, 10, 20, 50, 100? How many times would the people around me say I check my phone? Can I sit through a dinner out, a nice romantic dinner with a date, without continuing to check under the table to see, is there anything else going on somewhere else more exciting than what's happening here? Can I do that? Can I sit at a family meal? Let's say a Thanksgiving dinner. Can I sit at the Thanksgiving dinner and enjoy the people around the table, eye to eye, face to face contact? What about work? Can I work without obsessively checking Facebook? What about God? Is it possible for me to be alone, in silence, in solitude, and set the phone aside? Or what about this question? Is it possible for me to get behind the wheel of a car and not talk on the phone unless I have a hands-free device? Is it possible to drive down the interstate without texting? Is that possible? I think they are questions worth asking. The answers in some cases will just be answers about social convention and politeness and courtesy and the ability to connect with another person. The answers in other cases could be deadly in their consequences. In fact, in his book, A Deadly Wondering, the story of Reggie Shaw, Matt Richtel says there are people now they are finding who are so powerless to stop talking and texting that when they get in the car to drive, they put their phone in the trunk. It's the only way I can keep my hands off it. It's back there. Can't do anything about it as I drive. Which brings us to the question. Some are writing about this, the question of addiction. I know all of the dialogues and debates and discussions and all the rest. Can people really be addicted to something that isn't a substance? Some say, I absolutely understand addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs, addiction in that kind of way. But addiction to a phone? There are questions. But I suspect that asking one other simple question might help clarify. After thinking about it and studying about it over many years, I've come to the conclusion that maybe the most simple question to ask, if you suspect an addiction in your life, is this simple question. Can I stop? Is it an option to say no? After all, if it's not an addiction, you should be able to say no. That's not something I choose. This is not the time for that. I choose to drive without texting. But if you can't stop, that's worrisome. In fact, I want to read you the words of what's really a young woman, 14 years old. Got her first toy computer at 18 months of age. Got her first real cell phone in the 2nd grade. I want you to listen to her words, quoted in the Atlantic Journal. She says, I bring my iPhone everywhere, 14 years old. I have to be holding it. It's like OCD. I have to have it with me, and I check it a lot. It's not like I want to go on Facebook or I don't. I just go on it. I'm like forced to. I don't know why. Facebook takes up my whole life. If I'm not watching TV, I'm on my phone. If I'm not on my phone, I'm on my computer. If I'm not doing any of those things, what am I supposed to do? I mean, I don't put down my phone. And it makes me wish that I did. It's addicting. There's one other thing that 14-year-old Casey said that I'd like you to hear. A friend, she says, wasn't in the group chat, so we stopped being friends with her. Not because we didn't like her, but we just weren't in contact with her. That friend has a smartphone now, so that's what gets her in. We always loved her, and she was always our good friend, but she was excluded. And she knew it, too, because she didn't have an iPhone. It's the reality of our life and world. Many benefits. I mean, how recently have you asked yourself the question, what in the world did I do before this came along? How did I maintain contact? Make no mistake about it, there are many blessings. But sometimes the blessing becomes the curse if taken to an extreme. So the question, are you able to say no? This moment, this time, this place, with you, matters more to me than what's going on out there. Now, what in the world could the Bible have to say to this? I mean, come on. thousands of years old, in a time where social media would have been the stuff of extreme science fiction. What in the world can Scripture say to us? Well, I want to take you to Ecclesiastes. It's a rough book. I don't know if you've read Ecclesiastes lately, but if you're having a bad week, do not read Ecclesiastes. It'll send you right over the edge. You know, all this stuff about its vanity and it's worthless and the hopeless life you're living and all of that. Just stay away from Ecclesiastes, except for this section I want to read to you today. It's illuminating. It may have something to say to us in the 21st century about FOMO. You're probably familiar with this text, Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Here's what the old wise man wrote. There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden that God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. You're familiar with that passage. Those couplets are famous. Time to be born, a time to die, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance. Famous. Anyone who is even marginally acquainted with Scripture probably recognizes that passage. There's much we could learn from it. This morning, I want to point you to just two simple realities that might help us with our FOMO. The first one is in the first verse we read, Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1, because it's there in Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1, that the writer introduces the theme which he is about to unpack. All of the couplets that we read, they're an illustration of what he says in verse 1. Here's what he says: there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. There's a time for everything. It's a time to be on Facebook, time to be texting on your phone, a time to connect with and look at what's going on in the world around you, maybe even a time to look at it and then feel really, really bad, so you run and post something else to deal with how you felt, make them feel bad now. I don't know. There's a time for everything, says the wise man. And wisdom comes in being able to recognize and choose what this time is for. That's wisdom. This is a good time for that. This is not a good time for that. Wisdom comes in understanding what time this is. Because the truth is, if we're trying to somehow grab onto everything that's going on out there, we can end up missing what's going on right here. A number of years ago, we were in London. Our kids were a bit younger at the time. We were having a great time touring, seeing the city, deciding this is now our favorite city in the world. Went to Buckingham Palace. Wanted to see the residence of the royals. We were standing across the street in the park there at Buckingham Palace, looking at the sights, the scenery, what was happening, when all of a sudden there was a commotion and people started pointing and then kind of shouting, and they were saying, "The Queen, the Queen." We turned and looked, and here came a cavalcade of cars. And Anita and the kids, "The Queen." I mean, I like to see famous people. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I started digging through my camera bag. Where's my camera? I got to get a camera. And I started digging out. Here it is, trying to get it on. And finally I got it up. Where's the Queen? She's gone. What do you mean gone? She's gone. I didn't see her. Oh, well, it's just anyway. I missed seeing the Queen because I wanted to be able to dig out the camera and preserve this for posterity so that all the other times I could look back and say, see this picture? Yeah, that's the Queen right there. I can post that on my wife's Facebook. And in the midst of all of that, she came and went. So I'm like, maybe it wasn't the Queen. Oh, no. They say it was the Queen. How do you know it was the Queen? Because we know. We saw her. Yeah, I don't know. Probably just some body double. And then as we stand there, the flag changed over Buckingham Palace. We asked one of the guards, why are they changing the flag? He says, because that's the flag we fly when the Queen is here. I'm like, yeah, thanks. Go ruin somebody else's day. And yet, as I've thought about it, that's what happens at times in my life. I'm so busy with all the other stuff, trying to do this, that, and the other, trying to focus on what isn't here, the opportunity that I have, that I miss out on the fact that the wise man says, there's a time for everything, and there will come moments in your lives which, if you don't grab them in the here and now, they'll be gone forever. First thing the wise man says, there's a time for everything. Wisdom comes in being able to distinguish between when it's time for this and when it is not time for this. The second reality, second lesson that I draw out of these words, Ecclesiastes 3, is what he says in verse 11. It's after he said there's a time for everything, a season for every activity. It's after all the couplets that he's given as illustrative of his point. And then he says this, God makes everything beautiful in its time. Beautiful in its time. May I paraphrase that? Maybe what the wise man is saying is this. When you recognize this is the time, this is the moment, this is what this is for, in that recognition, in that reflection of wisdom, there is beauty. You recognize this moment for what it's made for. This is the time. It's beautiful. My predecessor here as lead pastor at the University Church was Dr. Bill Lovelace. Years ago, a friend of mine told me about an interesting event that happened when he was visiting in the home of Dr. Lovelace. He says, we were sitting there talking, just the two of us enjoying the conversation, when the phone began to ring. Back in those days, that was social media. That was pretty much it. It was interrupting. Phone began to ring, and my friend thought, well, you get up and get the phone and kind of interrupt our conversation. And it rang, and it rang, and it rang. Finally, my friend was a bit ill at ease and said, aren't you going to answer the phone? And Dr. Lovelace said, no. Don't let that thing dominate my life. It's just someone wanting a piece of my time that will take away from this time. That's beautiful. If you happen to be the person sitting in his presence. Because it says to you, you are worth my focus, my attention. You say, well, do we have to do that all the time? I don't know. That's why the wise man talks about wisdom. It's the ability to distinguish. There are times you'll need to answer. There are times you need to ignore. And being able to decide that, that's beautiful. That's wise. He makes everything beautiful in its time. The author, Arthur Gordon, in his book, A Touch of Wonder, tells a story from his childhood. Family was sitting around the supper table. He and his brother, pumped with excitement. Their dad was taking them to the circus. Their dad lived a hectic, busy life, but he had said, I'm taking tonight off, we're going to the circus. You could hardly tie them to the chair with excitement. During the meal, the phone rang. Mother answered the phone. She came and said to the father, to her husband, so-and-so from his work is on the phone. Something really important is taking place. He needs to talk to you. And Arthur Gordon said, my heart just sank. Because we'd been through this before. I knew what this would mean. Long phone call, and then probably, boys, I'm really sorry, but I looked down at my plate and just tried to steel myself for what was coming. And he said, my dad said, tell him I can't talk. He perked up. Mother said, he said it's really important. Tell him I can't talk. And the mother said, you know, the circus comes back. And Arthur Gordon said, my father said, yes, but childhood doesn't. Decades later, he remembered it as clear as a bell. That's beautiful. The beauty of being able to recognize this time, what it's for, this person, who they are, and to make a decision based on the free will God has given us, refusing to be manipulated even by the FOMO that becomes so acute in our hearts and lives. So what do we do about it? I suggest 3 simple things. Number 1, if you want to do something about this, live out that kind of wisdom, first suggestion is this: just test yourself. See if you can get through the rest of this service, through the interaction after the service, the time in the courtyard, without checking your phone. That's not too much to ask, is it? What's that, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, max? Don't worry, it'll still be there. The text isn't going to disappear. Try it. Number 2, as you go to lunch today, as you sit down with family, with friends, look them in the eye. Listen to what they say. And recognize that wisdom will tell you, this is my moment with these precious people. It will never come back. Let me focus on them. Third thing, not just today, not just this week, but from today forward, make a commitment with me. No texting while driving. Just make that commitment. And as you go, just go knowing this. As I preach this sermon today, I've preached this sermon to no one but me. If you want to eavesdrop, that's your business. Gracious God, you've given us this moment in time, these people, this worship service, your presence. Help us to have the wisdom to understand what a time is for and to experience the beauty of celebrating it as you intend. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Thank you for watching the Discover channel. This channel's primary focus is to share uplifting and enriching spiritual content with people of all backgrounds of life. These presentations will enhance and develop you intellectually so that you can make informed decisions that will assist you in your day-to-day life. Our goal is to bring hope to the viewers and encourage them. Should you share this vision, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your family and friends so that they too can benefit from this content. We have a Patreon account should you wish to support this channel so that we can produce more of this content. Books and merchandise will also become available as the channel grows. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you at the next one.